Blood is supposed to be thicker than water, but sibling rivalry can turn it into poison. When a cruel twin sister orchestrated a humiliating blind date prank to ruin her sister's life on camera, she didn't expect a centuries-old predator to walk through the door and claim the victim as his queen. The Kensington twins were a biological anomaly that seemed designed by a cruel sense of irony. Clara Kensington was the golden child, a wildly successful fashion influencer, living in a plush penthouse in Chelsea, boasting a life curated for millions of adoring followers. She was radiant cutthroat and thriving. Then there was Chloe. Born 7 minutes later, Chloe Kensington was the shadow. While they shared the exact same bone structure, Clara possessed a predatory confidence that made her magnetic, whereas Chloe was an introverted archivist at the British Library, hiding her striking features behind oversized tortoiseshell glasses and oversized knit sweaters. For 24 years, Clara had made it her life's mission to ensure Chloe remembered her place. If Chloe won an academic award, Clara would accidentally ruin her dress right before the ceremony. If Chloe liked a boy, Clara would sleep with him, just to prove she could. Yet despite a lifetime of microaggressions and blatant sabotage, Chloe still held out hope that underneath the designer veneer, her sister actually loved her. That naive hope was exactly what Clara preyed upon on a rainy Thursday in late October. "You need to get out of that dusty library, Chloe Hartouche." Clara had purred over the phone, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I've set you up. A blind date. His name is Liam Hastings. He's in wealth management, very successful, very handsome, and he loves intellectual girls. I showed him your picture, and he's dying to meet you." Chloe had hesitated. "Clara, I don't know. The last time you introduced me to someone, he spent the entire night talking about your Instagram stories." "I promise this is different," Clara insisted. "Consider it an early birthday present. I even pulled some strings to get you a reservation at L'Eclipse in Mayfair. 8 o'clock. Don't embarrass me." L'Eclipse was not just a restaurant. It was a fortress of exclusivity. It was the kind of establishment where billionaires, minor royals, and oligarchs dined in hushed, velvet-draped privacy. It was famously impossible to book a table unless you were practically royalty. The gesture seemed so overwhelmingly generous that Chloe's defenses crumbled. Maybe Clara really was trying to turn a new leaf. Chloe spent hours getting ready. She borrowed a deep emerald green silk dress that Clara had previously discarded as last season, painstakingly styled her hair into soft waves, and applied a subtle smoky makeup look that made her green eyes pop. Staring at the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She looked elegant. She looked worthy. The rain beat against the window of the black cab as it crawled through London traffic, dropping her off in front of the imposing brass doors of L'Eclipse. A towering doorman in a bespoke tailored coat looked her up and down before opening the door. Inside the restaurant was a masterclass in dark, moody opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast a dim amber glow over mahogany tables, and the air smelled of expensive oud and roasted truffles. Chloe approached the host stand, her heart hammering against her ribs. Name the maître de sharp-featured man named Henri asked without looking up from his leather-bound ledger. "Chloe Kensington. I believe my sister made a reservation under Hastings." Henry's eyes flicked up his gaze, chillingly condescending. He lingered on her dress, a subtle smirk playing on his lips. "Ah, yes. The blind date. Follow me," instead of leading her to the discreet, romantic booths lining the perimeter. Henri escorted her to a table dead center, in the room illuminated by a harsh overhead spotlight. It was the most exposed table in the house. Every glittering patron in the room could see her. Chloe sat down, her palms sweating. She checked her watch. 8:05 p.m. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The waiter ignored her entirely, refusing to even pour her water. The surrounding tables cast sidelong, pitying glances her way. She was the awkward, overdressed girl sitting alone at the worst table in London's best restaurant. Just as the sting of humiliation threatened to bring tears to her eyes, a man approached the table. Liam Hastings. He was objectively handsome, tall with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a sharp Tom Ford suit, but there was a smug, predatory glint in his blue eyes that immediately put Chloe on edge. "Chloe Wright?" he asked, not bothering to apologize for his lateness as he slid into the chair opposite her. "Let's get this over with. I'm starving." The date was a masterclass in psychological torture. Liam didn't ask a single question about Chloe. Instead, he snapped his fingers to summon the previously dismissive waiter who practically tripped over himself to attend to Liam. "We'll start with the beluga caviar," Liam ordered smoothly. "And bring a bottle of the Chateau Petrus 1990. For the main, I'll have the Wagyu tomahawk. He glanced at Chloe. "Just get her the house salad. She looks like she's watching her figure." Chloe's cheeks burned. "I'll have the sea bass, actually." Liam rolled his eyes. "Fine, but you're paying for it." The meal progressed in agonizing fashion. Liam spent the entire time texting on his phone, occasionally looking up to make disparaging remarks about Chloe's career, her clothes, and her quiet demeanor. "Clara said you were a bit of a charity case," he sneered, swirling the vintage wine in his glass. "I can see why she feels sorry for you. Must be hard being the ugly duckling of the family." Chloe's grip on her silver fork tightened until her knuckles turned white. "If you find me so repulsive, Liam, why did you agree to come?" A slow, cruel smile spread across Liam's face. He set his glass down. "Because, sweetheart, I was paid to." Chloe's heart stopped. "What?" Liam stood up from the table. He didn't lower his voice. In fact, he projected it so the neighboring tables could hear. "You really thought a guy like me would take a girl like you on a date to L'Eclipse? Look at yourself. You're a joke." From the shadows of a velvet-curtained VIP alcove at the back of the room, laughter erupted. Cold, familiar, chiming laughter. The curtain was pulled back and out stepped Clara Kensington. She was flanked by 3 of her influencer friends, all holding up their smartphones, their camera lights glaring harshly in the dim restaurant. Clara was wearing a breathtaking silver gown, looking like a goddess of vengeance. "Oh, Chloe," Clara laughed, strutting toward the table, the camera lens pointed directly at her sister's pale, horrified face. "The look on your face, it's priceless. Everyone say hi to my tragic twin sister, who actually thought a millionaire wanted to date a dusty librarian." The restaurant went dead silent, save for the snickering of Clara's entourage. Henri the maitre d' stood by, with a smirk, clearly having been bribed to facilitate the spectacle. "You set this up," Chloe whispered, the betrayal slicing through her chest like a physical blade. The £15,000 bill was resting in a leather booklet on the table. Clara had specifically chosen a restaurant she knew Chloe could never afford. "It's for the vlog, babe, turning my sister's tragic love life into a prank." "It's going to get millions of views," Clara said, leaning in close. "Don't be so sensitive. Now you better figure out how to pay that bill, because Liam and I are heading to a real party." Liam moved to stand beside Clara, wrapping an arm around her waist. Chloe was trapped. The entire room was watching her break. A tear slipped down her cheek, completely destroying whatever pride she had left. She was trapped in an opulent cage, entirely at the mercy of her sister's cruelty. Then the temperature in the room plummeted. It wasn't a subtle shift. The air instantly turned glacial cold enough to make the condensation freeze on the wine glasses. The ambient hum of the restaurant, the clinking silverware. The quiet murmurs, Clara's obnoxious giggling, ceased entirely. It was as if someone had hit the mute button on the universe. The heavy brass doors of the private elevator at the far end of the dining room chimed. They slid open. A man stepped out. He didn't just walk. He glided. He wore a bespoke 3-piece charcoal suit that seemed to absorb the light around him. He was terrifyingly tall, with raven-black hair swept back from a face that looked like it had been carved from marble by an artist who had never known mercy. His eyes were a piercing, luminescent silver, burning with a quiet, ancient authority. As he moved through the room, the patrons, billionaires, politicians, titans of industry physically recoiled. Some bowed their heads, others averted their eyes in instinctual primal fear. Henri, the arrogant maître d' suddenly looked as though he were going to be sick, his face draining of all colour. This was Alistair Vane. To the mortal world, he was the elusive billionaire owner of the Vane Syndicate, holding a monopoly on global real estate and shipping. But to the shadow world that operated beneath the neon lights of London, he was the vampire king of the European court. He was apex predator. He was death in a tailored suit. Alistair didn't look at Liam. He didn't look at Clara. His silver eyes were locked entirely on Chloe. He walked past Clara's entourage, moving with such unnatural, terrifying grace that the influencers lowered their phones, their hands suddenly trembling violently. He stopped at Chloe's table. The silence was deafening. Slowly, deliberately, Alistair reached out a pale, perfectly manicured hand. With a single finger, he lifted Chloe's chin, forcing her tear-streaked face up to meet his gaze. When he spoke, his voice was a deep, velvet rumble that vibrated through the floorboards, commanding absolute obedience. "Tears, ma chérie." Alistair murmured, his thumb gently wiping the moisture from her cheek. A queen should never cry in a room full of peasants. Clara, completely oblivious to the lethal danger standing in front of her, let out a nervous, indignant scoff. "Excuse me, who the hell are you? You're ruining the shot." Alistair turned his head slowly. The movement was barely human. He pinned Clara with a stare so cold it felt like a physical blow. The air pressure in the room shifted, popping the eardrums of those nearest to them. "I am the owner of this establishment," Alistair said, softly. Too softly. "And you are breathing my air without my permission." Liam, trying to regain his masculine bravado, puffed out his chest. "Listen, mate, we're paying customers. She's footing the bill." Alistair moved faster than the human eye could track. 1 second he was standing by Chloe. The next, his hand was wrapped around Liam's throat. He lifted the grown 200-pound man off the ground with a single hand, his expression entirely bored. Liam choked his face, turning a mottled purple, his legs kicking uselessly in the air. "You will speak when spoken to, insect." Alistair whispered the fangs, elongating slightly just enough for Liam and Clara to see the gleam of porcelain death. Clara screamed, dropping her phone. The screen shattered on the mahogany floor. Alistair dropped Liam like a sack of garbage. The wealth manager collapsed, gasping and retching on the floor. Alistair smoothed his lapel and picked up the leather billfold containing the £15,000 receipt. He didn't even glance at it. He snapped his fingers. Immediately, Henri ran over, practically sobbing in terror. "My lord," Henri whimpered, bowing deeply. Henri Alistair's voice was absolute zero. "You allowed trash into my dining room. You allowed them to insult the woman I have spent the last 3 months searching for." Chloe gasped, her eyes widening. Searching for her. I did not know, Mr. Vane, I swear it," Henri pleaded. "You are fired. Furthermore, you will ensure that this insect," Alistair pointed a polished Oxford shoe at the wheezing Liam, "and his shrieking companion are permanently blacklisted from every establishment in Europe. If I see their faces in my city again, I will have them fed to the hounds." Alistair turned his attention back to Clara, who was now backed against a pillar, shaking uncontrollably, her designer facade completely shattered. "The prank is over, little girl," Alistair sneered, his silver eyes flashing crimson for a fraction of a second. "Leave, now, before I decide to make you the main course." Clara and her friends scrambled toward the exit, dragging a coughing Liam with them, leaving their shattered phones and their shattered egos behind. The room remained utterly silent. No one dared to speak. Alistair turned back to Chloe, the terrifying predator instantly vanishing, replaced by a devastatingly gentle suitor. He offered her his hand. "Forgive the theatrics, Miss Kensington," he said, his eyes softening as he looked at her. "I detest poor manners. Now I believe you owe me a dance." The world outside L'Eclipse was a blur of neon reflecting off the wet London pavement, but inside Alistair's vintage armoured Rolls-Royce Phantom, it was impossibly quiet. Chloe sat rigidly against the plush leather seats, her mind struggling to process the sheer impossibility of the last 20 minutes. The man sitting across from her wasn't just a billionaire. The glowing silver of his eyes, the unnatural speed, the fangs it shattered every rational boundary she had ever known. Alistair poured 2 glasses of aged bourbon from a crystal decanter, offering her one. His terrifying aura had retracted, replaced by an intoxicating old-world charm. "You are trembling, Chloe," he noted his voice, a soothing baritone that seemed to calm her racing heart against her will. You're a vampire." She stammered the word, feeling ridiculous on her tongue. "And you said you were looking for me." "Why, I'm just an archivist." Alistair took a slow sip of his drink. "You are an archivist at the British Library, specializing in 17th century esoteric texts. 6 days ago, you were granted clearance to examine the heavily guarded Ashmole 782 manuscript." Chloe's breath hitched. Mentioning the Ashmole 782, a legendary historically documented alchemical text once belonging to Elias Ashmole, grounded this surreal nightmare into absolute reality. "How do you know about that? It's a closed collection." "Only top-tier historians have access." "Because I wrote it," Alistair said simply. 400 years ago. And it was sealed with a blood lock that could only be broken by a descendant of the mortal woman I loved. A woman who was murdered by my rivals before I could turn her. He leaned forward, the ambient streetlights illuminating the sharp, mesmerizing angles of his face. "When you touched the parchment without gloves last Tuesday, a paper cut dropped a single bead of your blood onto the vellum. The wards shattered. The shadow world felt the seismic shockwave of the seal breaking. I have been hunting the city for the source ever since. I finally tracked your magical signature to that restaurant, only to find you being tormented by those mindless vermin." Chloe stared at her hands. The tiny healing cut on her index finger was still visible. All her life, Clara had made her feel utterly insignificant, a genetic leftover. Yet here was an immortal king, telling her she held the bloodline of royalty. "My sister," Chloe whispered, the trauma of the night bubbling up. "She filmed it. She's going to post it. She has 5 million followers. By tomorrow, I'll be the biggest laughingstock in the country." A cruel, darkly amused smile touched Alistair's lips. "My dear Chloe, do you truly believe I govern the shadows but have no power over the light?" He tapped an encrypted mobile device resting on the console. "Watch." Across town, Clara was in the back of a vulgar neon party bus, furiously typing on her gold-plated iPhone. Liam sat next to her, nursing a bruised throat and a bruised ego. "I'm uploading the raw footage," Clara hissed, her face contorted in vindictive rage. "I don't care who that freak in the suit was. I'm going to ruin her." She hit publish. The loading bar reached 99%, and then her screen went entirely black. Error account suspended. Clara frantically tapped the screen. She opened her banking app to check her balances, millions tied up in brand deals. Greater than error credentials revoked. A text message chimed from her personal wealth manager at Coutts & Co., the exclusive private bank of the British elite. "Miss Kensington, pursuant to emergency directives from our primary shareholders at the Vane Syndicate, your accounts have been permanently frozen and all assets seized pending investigation for fraud. Do not contact this office again. No, 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 Clara shrieked, watching in real time as her verified social media accounts vanished into the ether. Her digital footprint, her sponsorships, her carefully curated empire, all of it was being methodically, ruthlessly erased from the internet. In less than 60 seconds, Clara Kensington ceased to exist in the modern world. Back in the Rolls-Royce, Alistair set his phone down. Your sister is currently learning that true power does not require an audience. Now tell me, Chloe, are you ready to leave your quiet life behind? Chloe looked out the window, watching the rain wash the grime from the city streets. For the first time in 24 years, she didn't feel like a shadow. She looked back at Alistair, her green eyes hardening with a newfound resolve. Yes, 3 months later, the world had forgotten Clara Kensington. Without her wealth and platform, her friends abandoned her within a week. She was forced to move into a damp studio flat in a less savoury part of East London, boiling with a toxic, consuming hatred for the sister who had seemingly vanished into high society. Chloe, however, had ascended. She stood in front of a gilded mirror inside Alistair's sprawling country estate, adjusting the bodice of a custom blood-red Alexander McQueen gown. Around her neck rested a priceless Cartier diamond collar, a gift from Alistair for the Winter Solstice Gala, the most crucial event in the European court's calendar. Tonight he was officially presenting her to the vampire aristocracy, not just as his mate, but as his queen. Their romance had blossomed in the quiet sanctuary of his libraries and the sprawling gardens of his estate. Alistair was fiercely protective, but unlike the mortals who had ignored her, he worshipped her intellect. He taught her the politics of the immortal elite, and she helped him translate ancient texts to secure his territory. She was happy. She was loved. But destiny rarely allows for uninterrupted peace. The gala was held at the real-life Wallace Collection in Manchester Square. The opulent museum, with its walls lined with old master paintings and antique armory, had been entirely bought out and warded by Alistair's guards. No uninvited creature could step through the threshold. The magical barrier was tied to Chloe and Alistair's blood. As Chloe descended the grand staircase, her hand resting lightly on Alistair's arm, the assembled crowd of hundreds of immortal aristocrats bowed in absolute reverence. The music swelled. It was perfect, until the heavy oak doors of the museum were blown off their hinges. The blast shattered the glass display cases containing 18th century porcelain. The music screeched to a halt. From the smoke and freezing winter air stepped Lord Cassian, a rogue French vampire who had long coveted Alistair's throne. His eyes burned a sickly, toxic green, and he held a wickedly curved silver blade. But that wasn't what made Chloe's blood turn to ice. Standing beside Cassian, clutching a bleeding cut on her arm, was Clara. She looked disheveled, hollowed out by jealousy, and utterly insane. How did they breach the wards? Alistair roared his fangs, descending as he shoved Chloe behind him, his guards drawing their weapons. The ward requires the Queen's blood signature to grant entry. Cassian laughed, a cruel, echoing sound. He yanked Clara forward by her hair. And what a delightful loophole genetics can be. Identical twins, identical DNA, identical blood signatures. Your little mortal rat of a sister practically begged me to let her in just to see you fall. Clara sneered at Chloe, her eyes wild. You took everything from me. You ruined my life. If I can't have the world, neither can you. You ruined yourself, Clara. Chloe said, her voice echoing through the silent, tense room. She didn't cower. She didn't hide. Cassian moved with terrifying speed. He threw a smoke bomb laced with dead man's ash, a rare alchemical poison that momentarily paralyzed vampires. Alistair's guards collapsed, choking. Alistair fought through the blinding pain, clashing with Cassian in a blur of superhuman speed, their fists and blades destroying priceless antiques in seconds. Cassian was fueled by dark magic, and he managed to drive a silver dagger through Alistair's shoulder, pinning the king against a marble pillar. Cassian raised his blade to strike the fatal blow to Alistair's heart. "Now," Cassian hissed, "the syndicate is mine." "No," Chloe screamed. She didn't think. Instinct, ancient and dormant, flared to life inside her. She remembered the texts she had translated. She remembered the Ashmole 782. The blood of the seer wasn't just a key. It was a weapon. Chloe grabbed a shattered shard of glass from a broken display case. Without hesitation, she sliced it across her own palm. Chloe, no, Alistair choked out. But as her blood hit the marble floor, it didn't just pool. It ignited. A blinding, ethereal blue flame erupted from the drops of her blood, surging across the floor like a tidal wave of pure energy. The magic of her ancestor, lying dormant for 4 centuries, had found its true vessel. The blue fire hit Cassian instantly, burning the dark magic from his veins. He shrieked, dropping his weapon, as the flames seared his flesh, pushing him away from Alistair. Chloe stepped forward, her eyes glowing with a terrifying, radiant light. She raised her bleeding hand. "Kneel," she commanded. It wasn't a request. It was an absolute magical imperative, laced with the authority of the ancient bloodline. The shockwave of her voice forced every vampire in the room to their knees. Cassian collapsed, his body pinned to the floor by the sheer gravity of her power. Alistair pulled the dagger from his shoulder, his wound healing instantly as the dead man's ash dissipated. He looked at his mate, absolute awe and fierce pride radiating from his silver eyes. He walked over to Cassian, picked up the rogue lord by the throat, and with a single brutal twist snapped his neck. Cassian's body crumbled into ash. Silence reclaimed the grand hall. Clara stood alone by the ruined entrance, trembling violently. The blue flames completely ignored her, recognizing her lack of magical essence. She was just an empty, bitter shell. Chloe lowered her hand. The glowing faded from her eyes, but the regal authority remained. She walked slowly toward her twin. "Chloe." Clara whimpered, dropping to her knees, real tears of terror spilling down her cheeks. "Please, we're sisters. I'm your blood. You used our blood to betray me," Chloe said softly, looking down at the woman who had tormented her for 2 decades. "You set me up as a joke. You brought an assassin into my home. What shall I do with her, my queen?" Alistair asked, coming to stand beside Chloe, his arm wrapping protectively around her waist. "Don't kill her," Chloe said. Clara let out a sob of relief. But Chloe wasn't finished. "Death is too quick. Let her live out her natural mortal life. But take away her memories of the shadow world. Let her live the rest of her days, knowing she lost everything, but never understanding why. Let her fade into the obscurity she always feared." Alistair smiled, a dangerous, beautiful sight. "As you command." Alistair's hand glowed faintly as he touched Clara's forehead. Her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed into a deep, dreamless sleep. Tomorrow she would wake up in her dingy flat, a forgotten, ordinary woman with a heavy, unexplainable void in her chest. Alistair turned Chloe to face the massive room of kneeling aristocrats. The elite vampires of Europe bowed their heads no longer, just respecting the king's choice of mate, but terrified and awed by the raw power of the woman beside him. "Long live the queen," Alistair murmured, pressing a reverent kiss to her temple. Chloe leaned into his embrace, looking out over her new kingdom. The Shadow Sister had finally stepped into the light, and the world would never dare to mock her again. Did this tale of ultimate revenge, hidden power, and immortal romance keep you on the edge of your seat? If you loved watching Chloe rise from an underestimated sister to a terrifyingly powerful vampire queen, show us some love. Smash that like button, share this story with a friend who loves a satisfying plot twist, and don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling, dark romance sagas. Drop a comment below. What would you do if you discovered you had ancient magical blood? See you in the next video.